So that is communication, and now we're going to talk about managing the mechanics of a contract. And what this includes is the day-to-day tasks of getting a project done. It will include managing the deliverables, the changes to the document, and the admin record. After we talk about that, then we'll move into some of the rules of contract management, and that is invoicing and the roles of the contracting officer and the core contracting officer's representative. Now, Chris, you've been on both sides of this. You've been a contractor, you've been a core project manager, resource specialist. So give us some ways of how to effectively manage a contract.
Sure, Kathy. I just want to kind of reiterate what both Kathy and Molly have said. As we've talked about, communication is a critical component of an effective working relationship with a contractor. One of the tendencies of a team over the long and complicated process of something like an EIS or an RMP is to develop a feeling of familiarity and friendship with the rest of the team. Now, while this is a great benefit to the project, there always must be clear boundaries for daily interaction between the specialists and the contractor throughout the process. And that interaction will be guided by the communication protocol. Well, in addition to communication, what do we need? Managing a contract requires us to manage the deliverables. We've asked the contractor to prepare something for us. Typically, although they're providing a service under the contract, the something they provide is a tangible product, like a socioeconomic study, a draft RMP, etc. We refer to these products as deliverables. Often the first time the BLM is going to see that deliverable is when it's provided to us as a draft document for review. This first review is a critical time, and both the BLM and the contractor should be prepared to review the document in the agreed upon period and to provide and respond to timely, effective comments in that period. We all realize that things come up throughout the process, but it's really important to get as much as possible covered in that first review. So for the BLM project manager, that means coordinating schedules of key employees well in advance to make sure that the necessary review can be completed by the appropriate staff. Some additional considerations and include things like field work season, end of year or use or lose schedules, what other EISs or EAs are going on in that office, new management transitions. Do you really want to schedule the RMP review the first week you have a new field manager in the office? So once we've established those expectations for both the BLM and the contractor, now it's time to consider the product we actually received. Most of the contractors out there really want to do a great job because first, they get paid for it and they rely on good past performance to win future projects. And second, like us, they believe in what they do and they want to be professional and really do the best job they can. So despite that, for any number of reasons, sometimes the documents or services that they provide are really not up to snuff. What do we do in that case? The first step is really to figure out both what is deficient and what is necessary to correct it. This is similar to what an effective comment from the public or other stakeholders would be on draft NEPA documents. Those of you familiar with NEPA can probably relate to this. We need to identify the problem, what needs to be done, and provide enough detail for the contractor to get the picture. Additionally, tying action items to all comments will facilitate a more timely and accurate response from the contractor. Instead of commenting something like, "What about visual resource management?" perhaps instead comment something like, "Visual resource management class 2 is inappropriate in this area because there are 3 wind projects currently under development. Revise the proposed management to consider these projects," which is a little more of a constructive and effective comment. The next tip is to talk to your appropriate contractor point of contact. Try to figure out what caused the problem. Is the document too vague, too long, too detailed? Is it not clearly written or maybe confusing to the reader? For example, maybe a draft air quality report failed to consider all the effects the BLM thought it should. Sometimes it's as easy as a call from the BLM specialist to the contractor's specialist, following the communication protocol, of course, to get the issue resolved. Then there's really nothing that needs to continue up the chain and everyone is happy. But definitely feel free to run any scenarios or questions by your contracting officer. Another suggestion for effective document management is to have a format agreed on by the BLM project manager and the contractor ahead of time to receive comments, such as a comment sheet use of track changes, or use of e-planning. Whatever that format is, BLM staff should use it to make their comments. It's hard to compile comments provided in multiple formats and increases the chances something is going to get lost or missed. As a follow-up to that, a comment tracking sheet also provides a way to track how the comments are going to be addressed and responded to. One more suggestion. The project manager might want to take the time to consolidate and scrub those comments for consistency and clarity. Sometimes different specialists may provide conflicting comments, which can put the contractor in a position of being unable to resolve all of them in the BLM's preferred way. So the project manager and even the authorized officer will need to determine which comments go forward to the contractor, or maybe find a way to remove the conflict but capture the concern expressed in a way the contractor can effectively respond to. Another tool we can use to make the process easier is the BLM provides all the comments to the contractor at once. What I mean by this is we really shouldn't provide our comments piecemeal or after the deadline that we've agreed to, because the contractor has likely already moved on and begun responding to our first set of comments. That definitely doesn't mean we need to let a document go out with major flaws we don't catch till after that date. Most of these times, these late-breaking issues can be resolved by mutual goodwill and compromise. All right, so now we've received our document back from the contractor and it's perfect. Well, maybe not always perfect. While it would be great if the contractor could address every comment the way we think they should, that might be a little bit unrealistic. One way to increase the effectiveness of this commenting process is maybe to add an intermediate step where the BLM and the contractor meet to discuss the comments. In preparation for this, the contractor's project manager could compile a list of questions from his or her specialists where they may need more direction or information to respond to a BLM comment. Doing this during the document revision process can help keep the progress going and maybe prevent another round of back and forth comments. Again, being proactive and responsive is a great idea for both parties.
You know, Chris, something that we've been using effectively during document reviews is the idea of holding a live document review workshop, or some of you may be familiar with them as projector parties. For this, we invite the contractor into our office. We have our ID team assembled, and we review the document on a big screen in our conference room, and we make changes live. And this allows us to both make changes and get approval on those changes in real time.
That's a great suggestion, Molly, and it really can make the process flow better. So when we get our document back, take the time to search for flaws, check and see how the comments we made have been addressed. If it's just a couple of missed comments, then a specialist and the BLM project manager can probably resolve them. If the way the comments were incorporated indicates a bigger issue or maybe a broad-scale problem, we might need to involve the Corps and potentially the contracting officer as well. So we've talked a little bit about communication, we've talked about managing the documents we receive. Let's move on to the administrative record. We'll touch on it briefly today and get into more detail on this in Broadcast 3. The admin record is a crucial part of any NEPA action. It forms the basis of the record of review that goes before the IBLA or a court in determining whether we did our job right. So basically, like UFOs, if it's not in black and white or color, in the record, it didn't happen no matter how much we think it did. With a poor administrative record, we'll end up in the Area 51 of NEPA documents, lots of rumors but no proof. So to keep the record up to date, it's important to have planned periodic updates. Whether the record is being maintained by the contractor or by the BLM, we need to identify a clear and consistent process for sending documents to that record. This process should include what types of documents, in what format, and to whom they're going to be sent. We might want to have a key single point of contact. This really should be a group mailbox or a group inbox or common folder. We don't want to rely too heavily on any individual person for this function. Another idea is to provide training to the staff on the why and the what of the admin record. Understanding the role of the admin record in the process helps remind us why we need to have it and really underscores the importance of keeping all of our decisions clear, well-reasoned, and in the public's eye. Doing this will continue the long tradition of the courts affording the agency what we call judicial deference. Judicial deference means that as long as we did our job, the courts will generally uphold the decisions we make and will not try to substitute their judgment for that of the agency empowered to make the decision. The next topic we're going to touch on is how to improve the process. I think we've all heard from everyone on the panel, document. Everything that we do on a contract needs to be documented somewhere. Contract disputes are really no place we want to have a he said, she said discussion because it's only going to end badly for all the parties. Second tip, manage the relationships of the key personnel. A good working relationship can do far more to keep a project on track than any well-written scope of work. And finally, treating all parties like partners and remembering the contractor is here to support the BLM's needs as we define them in the scope of work, as well as maintaining a professional relationship, all help to keep the project going smoothly.
Thanks, Chris. And of course, as the host, I have to highlight a few of the points I thought of what you said that were particularly important. One thing I heard you say is that the ID team needs to review the products within the schedule. We all agreed on the schedule, so we need to be able to adhere to the schedule. And you advised the BLMers to write effective comments, just like we asked the public to include both the problem and the solution. And one of the suggestions that I thought about is in our EA class, we teach people to review a document from a broad scale, a mid scale, and a fine scale level. So at the broad scale, you'll be able to tell right away what, if there's big sections missing or if there's major problems. Mid scale, you get more into the details, and the fine scale is probably left more for the technical editor, but that might be a way to look at the comments or review the documents. You also suggested using a tracking sheet. Everybody agree on the tracking sheet and then use it from there. And then the project manager should coordinate comments to eliminate inconsistencies. And then a couple suggestions on the admin record. First of all is you suggested training your staff, and we do have a broadcast on administrative record that people may want to go to. It's on the Knowledge Resource Center. You suggested to identify one point of contact that the admin record goes through. One of the things I really liked that you said was update the admin record regularly rather than waiting till the end of a project, like a 7-year project, and updating it then. And then, of course, be thorough. We got a suggestion from Wyoming, and that was to create 2 indexes for the administrative record, and one that tracks the privileged information and one that's without. And that way you'll have 2 indexes easily ready to go to whatever audience would take those. All right, that was great. So Cindy, what can you tell us about managing mechanics from your perspective as contracting officer at the NOC?
Well, thank you, Kathy. And as always, I must echo what Chris, Molly, and you have said. Document, document, document. As you remember from the first broadcast, to get your contracting staff involved early and often, the contracting staff can save you valuable time and resources during the management phase. If you have questions or concerns, ask. What does managing mechanics mean to a contracting officer? Well, it means that we're moving from the award phase and the acquisition process into the performance phase. What we end up doing is we provide signed copies of all documents to all parties that are involved. We complete the delegation of authority letter to the contracting officer's representative and the contractor. By delegation of authority, the contracting officer's representative has specific responsibilities that include monitoring the contractor's performance to ensure the work that we've asked the contractor to do is being done, informing the contracting officer when the contractor's performance is outside of the scope, and reviewing the accuracy of the contractor's invoices and certifying to reflect a complete payment.
Okay, so I'm sure that some of you are wondering why we're starting to stumble a little bit. We're having some issues with the teleprompter a little, so I'm sure that you can all bear with us a little bit. All right, so I would like to know if any of you have any examples of when we asked a contractor to do work that was beyond the scope.
Yeah, I'd like to offer one. One that comes to mind is a BLM project for a transmission line right-of-way, and we asked the contractor to prepare 3 visual simulations for the new line. And when the products were delivered, the simulations were done using photographs that had been taken during the summer. But then upon review, the BLM realized that, maybe we'd like to see what the simulations look like using a winter background. So we asked the contractor to run 3 more simulations using a winter background. Well, even though we only used 3 simulations for the EIS analysis, in the end, we had then asked for 6 total simulations when the contract only said 3, or only called for 3.
That's a good example.
That's a really great example, Molly, because that happens quite frequently. A couple of the other core responsibilities are report suspected procurement fraud, bribery, and any other improper conduct to your contracting officer. Assure that the contractor has the necessary clearances to gain access to the BLM facility and any computer systems that they may need. Conduct meetings with the contractor to discuss the project status and identify any changes. Document whenever you have any contact with your contractor and keep it in the core working file, or what I call the daily log, which can be subject to review. Documentation should be in typewritten form. Emails are very acceptable. However, handwritten notes are okay provided that the notes indicate the date and the contractor's name.
So Cindy, that's a good list of core responsibilities. What about some of the responsibilities that are not under the core's purview?
Another good point, Kathy. The things that contracting officers, representatives are not authorized to do are included also in the delegation letter that goes out to themselves and to the contractor. Here are a few things that a core is not authorized to do. They are not authorized to make commitments for promises or contractors relating to award of contracts, instruct the contractor to start or stop work at any time, approve delivery or disposition of government-furnished property not specifically delineated in the contract, provide verbal or written guidance to contractors that might be interpreted as a change in the scope or the terms of the contract. They are not allowed to modify the scope of work as specified in the terms of the contract, and we'll discuss modifications later today and in broadcast 3.
So let me make sure I understand. You're saying as a project lead or even as a core, would I have the authority to ask the contractor to do something different? Say produce 2 internal drafts instead of 1, or change the schedule, or hold an additional meeting? Or are those changes that need to be conveyed by the contracting officer?
Molly, these can be gray areas, but the general across-the-board answer is no. And that's a great question. You do not have the authority to ask the contractor to make these changes. These types of changes need to be communicated by the contracting officer. It's the Corps' responsibility to ensure the contractor is doing what they say they are doing and meeting the deadlines using the reporting process that we asked them to do, as they accepted and we accepted in their proposal. These items need to be modified, as they often are, in a modification or a written agreement upon modifications needed to be signed by both parties. We will cover that in a little bit more today also.
Okay, one of the critical elements of managing a contract is invoicing. So tell us about that.
Okay. Invoicing is one of the most critical things that a core can do. They need to ensure that the invoices are correct and match the progress to the deliverables in the agreed upon contract. The way that we do invoices have changed in the past couple of years. And as of May 1st, 2011, new awards must be submitted electronically through the U.S. Treasury, the U.S. Department of Treasury, and it's called the Internet Payment Platform System, or IPP. A proper invoice requesting payment must comply with the requirements that are identified in the FAR, or Federal Acquisition Regulations, and the prompt payment clause in that contract. The following documents are required to be submitted as an attachment to the IPP invoice: summary of charges claimed, reports of deliverables or milestones, a detailed breakdown of the level of effort charged by labor category. The contractor must use IPP website to enroll and access and use the IPP for submitting requests for payment. Contractors get help with their enrollment by contacting the IPP production help desk by email or phone.
Okay, so that's invoicing. Something else we've heard a lot about is the Prompt Payment Act. What can you tell us about that?
Okay, the Prompt Payment Act is a rule that ensures that federal agencies pay vendors in a timely manner. That is one reason it's very important for cores to look at and improve invoices, is that that if we do not meet that obligation, there's a percentage of interest that is charged as a penalty against the government. A monthly report is generated by the BLM for how much interest we've paid.
And I'm sure nobody out there has ever been on that list, right?
Never.
Okay, so Cindy, I know you wanted to go into more detail, for example, listing the responsibilities of agency heads, but in the interest of time, our viewers who are interested in that type of detail can go to the FAR, and it's in part 32.903, and you can read all about it. Now, it's very easy to find that by doing an internet search. Okay, so what you said that jumped out to me the most was that everyone needs to pay attention to the delegation letter. That differentiates between the core duties and the contracting officer duties. And something that the folks out there may not have known, it was kind of new to me, is there are some new invoicing procedures. So you talked about both what and how the contractors submit their invoices, and then you talked about the responsibilities of the core, including to approve invoices promptly.